7:00 in the PM means it's time for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, of course, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, myffpc.com. Follow me on the X at Eric Balkman if you're so inclined. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not a great Xer or tweeter, whatever it is. I apologize. I'm trying to do more, but there's only so much I can do. So basically it's promotion for stuff like this, any of the shows I'm doing, but mostly promoting all the great guests and the great guests, great co-hosts that I have on all these shows. And want to welcome in one of the legends tonight from High Stakes Fantasy Football. You follow him on the X at Overhyped Sleeper, missing the last E in Sleeper. He is now with Player Profiler. So congratulations to the incomparable Dan Williamson. Dan, thank you for joining me tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate you having me on, and really looking forward to it. And you don't have to worry about not tweeting, because you know what? Everybody gets a lot of your goodness through podcasts anyway, so it's all already out there. So you don't have to worry about it.
Well, then I won't worry about it. I appreciate it. So a couple of questions right off at the top. Number one, how did you get hooked up with Player Profiler? Because I know a lot of the GOAT District guys, you're part of the GOAT District tree. You know, we talk about these coaching trees in the NFL. You're part of the GOAT District tree where you've branched off from somebody, people have branched off from you. Is that how you got hooked up with Player Profiler? Did Theo Greminger just basically say, Dan, you're too smart not to be on this site? We got to have you aboard.
Yes, it was partially that. It was also me kind of seeking it out a little bit, because the GOAT District is on hiatus for a while. JD has a very busy life going on, lots of things, and just really it wasn't having time to handle all the rigors of podcasting and everything else. So he said, I just really need to take a break. He says, I don't know how long it'll be. And I said, okay. I understand that. It's got to be family and work come first, and whatever else comes after that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Took the chance to join Theo and do some fun stuff with Player Profiler.
And you actually already have a piece published on Player Profiler. It's sort of an AFC East look at what you need to be doing in your dynasty leagues. We're actually going to spend an entire segment on that tonight. I'm looking forward to that. Coming up on tonight's show, we will actually be going around the NFL here coming up in this first segment. We're going to find out where Dan stands on certain players, including the new Arthur Smith-led Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba, Lamar Jackson, and much more there. The FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. Dan has been one of the first competitors, not only in that tournament, but a lot of the other FFPC leagues that are already going off, including the Hardway draft. We can get into that if you want as well, because I think that's a really fun draft to get into every single year. And then the Dynasty State of the Union. As I said, we're going to get through the AFC East. I've singled out some players, not all the players, from Dan's piece on playerprofiler.com, which you can check that out there. But I definitely want to get into some of those players because I own them in several leagues, and I want to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing with them. And I know if I own them, plenty of other people probably do too as well. So Dan will get into that. And by the way, Dan, we're not going to let you get away before we close the show tonight. I need a Super Bowl prediction and a final score from you as well. So that's going to be fun. It's weird, Dan, because like this time of year, I think the whole world and NFL fans are all we're talking about is Super Bowl, Chiefs and Niners and Purdy and Mahomes and Kelsey and Samuel and McCaffrey and all. And like, I think from a fantasy standpoint, we're already like on to 2024. Like that's so like we've been inundated with Super Bowl stuff, but the majority, like 99.9% of the show tonight is going to all be nothing to do with the Super Bowl. It's all going to be about 2024 drafts.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly where I'm at too. I know the Super Bowl is going on out there somewhere. I'm not worried about it until Sunday. I've got my bets in. I've got, everything set up on the playoff leagues that I have. And so there's really nothing to worry about. So there's, let's just keep focused on 2024 and try to get ahead there.
One of the things that we will be talking about coming up in the second hour of the show is the Never Too Early Best Ball tournaments over at the FFPC. You can actually play in those along with Dan and compete against Dan when you go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com. There's the normal Never Too Early tournament and then the Superflex Best Ball tournament as well. They're going to go all the way up to the start of the NFL draft on April 25th. Slim rules. There's no kickers, no defenses, 20-round draft, 14-week regular season. Playoffs go from weeks 15 through 17. You can play with a 30-second, 60-second, 2-hour, or 6-hour clock, and you can take your shot at either a $25,000 grand prize in the normal. I feel weird calling it the normal, the classic, whatever you want to call it, the FFPC Never Too Early tournament. That's a $125 entry fee. You can win 25 grand. You can enter the Superflex one for $35 and win up to $10,000 there. That's the grand prize in that competition. Shout out to our man behind the glass, Tyler Soto, tonight. Let's get into it. Now, do we want to talk, did you see this breaking news on Zay Flowers, Dan?
Yeah, I did catch that. I didn't dig into it very much, but it sounds like he's got an issue coming up, a little bit of a assault, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, that's what it looks like. So this is the source is the Baltimore Banner, which I am not familiar with at all. But it sounds like a reputable, not a sports rag, but an online sort of catch-all news website for Baltimore. Zay Flowers is being investigated for his involvement in an alleged assault. Baltimore County Police are investigating it, and it does involve him. It includes the police department in Acton, Massachusetts, which acknowledged a domestic violence incident report related to an incident in Baltimore County. Now, the Acton police didn't release the report because they have laws there that make sure that the communications between the victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, they're kept confidential. So we don't really have a whole lot of details. We don't have anything to go on, but it looks like at this moment in time, Zay Flowers has not been charged with a crime. From a dynasty standpoint, I know you play in a ton of dynasty leagues, Dan. Is there any actionable advice we can give owners of Zay Flowers right now, or non-owners of Zay Flowers, that you want to maybe strike while the iron's hot, where there's the unknown with this? I don't know if I want to. It'd be different if this was a redraft league and you're on the clock and this is easy. I'm going to avoid Flowers here. But from a dynasty standpoint, is there anything we can do, or are you just best to sit tight and find out how the details come out on this?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on where you're at in your particular league. If you're a contender, then the Flowers situation is probably one you want to steer clear of, for just the same reason that the redrafters want to steer clear in the best ballers. If you're not a contender, though, I mean, this could turn out to be a buying opportunity, because let's assume that this isn't going to just really blow up, and that it's something where it's maybe 6 games at most, and that I don't mean to minimize the domestic violence part here at all. Don't get me wrong there. But as far as as far as fantasy football, where we're just counting on players' stats, I'm not really endorsing or not endorsing players' behaviors ever. I'm just using their stats, and so that's a place where I would look at it and say, you know what, in the long term, this is something that hopefully he will get by. I mean, it is a red flag, and if it's happened once, it could happen again. But on the other hand, if it is a little bit of a buying opportunity for a really good player, it's worth looking into if you don't think you're going to necessarily need to use him, at least for the first half of the season.
I think that's interesting, and it's an interesting way to looking at it. And it's something that you can, I don't know how active dynasty players are in early February as well. So sending out trade offers for them, I don't know if you're going to get a ton of responses on it, but it is worth looking at, especially since what else are you doing right now? If you're not on the clock of a slow redraft, you might as well send out a few offers and see what happens. Greg Roman, holy cow, 2024, and we're still talking about him. NFL Network's Ian Rappaport has reported that the Chargers earlier he reported that Greg Roman would be joining the Chargers, but now we find out that it's going to be the offensive coordinator position. This is under Jim Harbaugh, their new head coach. Obviously, we know Greg Roman. For him, running the ball is a good alternative to running the ball. He loves to rush the football. He was under John Harbaugh as the Ravens offensive coordinator, not this year, because that was the guy from Georgia whose name is escaped, Todd Monken. Todd Monken was there this past year, but 2022, Greg Roman was there under John Harbaugh. Justin Herbert does not run a ton, but he can run. I think the interesting thing about this Roman hire, Dan, is this is great news for the running game, but who's going to be leading the running game? Like, is it Austin Eckler? Is it somebody else who's not even on the roster right now? If we look at the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament ADP, by the way, shout out to Fantasy Mojo at Fantasy Mojo on X, Darren Armani, the godfather of the FFPC Pros versus Joe's competition. Anytime I cite ADP, I'm getting it right from Fantasy Mojo. Austin Eckler, a guy who was going in the mid-first round last year, has fallen to running back 24. He's going at the end of the 7th round, not the 5th, not the 6th, but the 7th round right now, Dan. I'm curious to how you are treating Austin Eckler now with this news about Greg Roman here. Is there something that we can tell the owners who are drafters who are playing in the Never Too Early tournament? Okay, now that we know it's Roman, now that we know Eckler, I mean, Eckler is still under contract. Let's figure this out. How do we attack this as fantasy players?
Yeah, it's a difficult situation because we don't know if Eckler is still going to remain with the team. Would be nice if he does, because then we kind of know a little bit more what to expect. But, I know a lot of people are kind of getting off Justin Herbert for the, because of the Greg Roman news, just because, there hasn't been a lot of passing going on. I think that's a little bit of lazy analysis. I know Greg Roman, I can read you off some numbers. 31, 31, 32, 29, 31, 32, 32, 32, 9, 28. That's where he is ranked in the league on pass attempts on all 10 seasons where he has been the offensive coordinator.
Okay. All right. So let me stop you right there for a second, because I heard a lot of late 20s and I heard a lot of early 30s. I also to borrow a line from Tommy Boy, did I catch a 9er in there? What happened? What happened the year that he finished 9th, or his offense finished 9th in passing attempts? That doesn't sound familiar at all.
Well, actually, it's fairly familiar. It was 2021 Baltimore, of all things, when they were
9th.
Yeah, 9th in passing attempts.
Wow, mind blown.
Yeah, so that was a year when he was really trying to fast track Lamar as a passer, and that had worked with marginal effect, I guess you would say. Mm-hmm. But really most of the offenses he's coordinated for have had some not great passers, shall we say. San Francisco for several years, Buffalo for a couple of years, 2015 and 2016. And I don't even want to go back and look and see who the quarterbacks for Buffalo were then, because it's going to cause me to gouge my eyes out or something.
JP Lossman, EJ Manuel years.
Oh God, yeah, I think it might have been then. So anyway, but that's, to me, that's kind of the lazy analysis. So okay, yeah, we know what Greg Roman has been. We know what Jim Harbaugh has been. But the thing is, Jim Harbaugh just took that Michigan program through several years, 10 years, 9 years, something like that, in the college ranks. And during the time when all of a sudden, all the rules are changed, we got all this NIL, everything else, he's, running a program in the Big Ten, which is a very difficult conference to be in. He's no dummy. I mean, he's not going to sit there and look at Justin Herbert and go, yeah, let's run the ball 45 times a game. He's going to want to take advantage of the weapons that he has. And I think he'll do a good job of it. So to whatever extent Justin Herbert is getting pushed down, I'm just looking at that as kind of a little bit of a buying opportunity.
So, and I think this is interesting too for the Chargers, because you look at, well, what's your opinion? Like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, are they both back? It sounds like Keenan Allen's probably going to be back, but Mike Williams is much more of a coin flip.
Yeah, it's going to be tough because they don't have a lot of salary cap space. In fact, I believe they are negative on cap space. I haven't made it quite around to the NFC with all my Dynasty State of the Union. I've made it pretty much through the AFC, but just give it a quick look. Yeah, the Chargers are $44 million in the hole on salary cap right now. Yeah, so they're going to be looking to cut salary everywhere. Keenan Allen, even if he stays, probably is going to have to go on a reduced deal. Mm-hmm. They'll modify it somehow. See if he'll take a pay cut, throw in some void years, all that kind of stuff. So, as we know from the Saints every year, who are about 1 million in the hole on salary cap, and every year they, wave their hands around, and all of a sudden, the problem is gone, or at least kicked down the road until, the next year. I'm sure the Chargers could fix it, and I'm sure they can do it with Keenan Allen. I think it would be tough though to put Mike Williams in there too.
What's interesting is, so let's just say, Mike, for the sake of this scenario, let's say Mike Williams isn't back. They still have Joshua Palmer. They invested a first-round pick into Quentin Johnston. And I'm not saying they're going to do this, Dan, but I've seen a ton of mock drafts out there that have him taking Brock Bowers. And so if they add Bowers to this, my God, I know Greg Roman loves to run the ball, but at the same time, he's smart. You just said Harbaugh is smart. Like, these guys are going to still be passing the ball, regardless of what Greg Roman wants to do, because he's got to find a way to fit his scheme to the talent they have in with the Chargers. And they do have talented pass catchers. And if they draft Bowers, it gets even more talented.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they draft Bowers, though, because I do think this is one place where, Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman are going to let their instincts kind of take over. I wouldn't be surprised to see him take a player on defense or a player on the offensive line. I'm hoping for offensive line if they don't go with a skill player. But, because they've got Justin Herbert, and they can tell him, you know what, you're a good quarterback. You're not going to have the greatest weapons in the world, but you're going to have some pretty good ones. You're going to have good enough ones to get by. We're going to give you some extra protection up here. We're going to make sure we can run the ball effectively so teams can't really tell what's coming. And, we're going to let you throw that ball. And, maybe you don't have, the world's greatest, pair of wide receivers. Maybe you only got one great wide receiver, but we can make it work.
And I think like how have you been treating the Chargers in your never too early tournaments? Have they been targets? Have they been fades? Or has it just been, if they get to a certain point, I'll pick them? How have you been treating them?
Yeah, I've taken Justin Herbert a couple times. I haven't been in a spot where Keenan Allen has really come up to me where I didn't think it was too early. But I'm looking at where he goes, and I don't have a problem with it. Mike Williams, same deal. Austin Eckler, I think if he stays, he's probably cheap. If he's not completely dust, he's probably cheap. But we don't know if he's going to stay, and we don't know if he's dust. So right. I think it's a nice risk reward right there.
Keenan, I mean, here's the thing. Like, you look at where these guys were going last year, and you look at now this year, Keenan Allen, ADP of 402. Austin Eckler already said late 7th round. Like, even if you don't like these guys, you seriously got to take a long look at them at that point because of where they're going right now, especially when we're trying to cash in on this early value drafting in January and now February. Kliff Kingsbury, once again in the news. Fox Sports' Peter Schrager has reported that the Commanders have made Kingsbury their new offensive coordinator. Now, what's interesting about this is it sounded like, and I feel like I talked about this last week, it sounded like he was going to be the Raiders OC. And then he removes himself from consideration there, decides to take the Commander's position under Dan Quinn instead. Kingsbury, obviously, we know him from when he coached the Arizona Cardinals, the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals for 3 years. And now the Commanders, I almost said Redskins. Now I did. The Commanders have the number 2 pick in the draft. So Kingsbury will be working closely with potentially a very young quarterback. Whether that's Caleb Williams or not, I don't know. Drake May, who knows? I think that when we look at Kingsbury's career in the NFL, we had higher expectations than what his offenses were able to deliver on. Your thoughts here with Kingsbury taking over in Washington? Is this a slam dunk now, Dan, that the Commanders are taking a quarterback at 2 or potentially trading up to 1 to get Caleb Williams? And if that's the case, what's the Kingsbury effect on the Commanders' offense this season?
Yeah, I think that pretty well telegraphs they're likely to take a quarterback. I think that was the case anyway, but I don't think Kliff would have jumped ship from the Raiders over to the Commanders without, knowledge that, hey, we're targeting a quarterback here. We want you to work with that quarterback. He does have a history of doing pretty well with quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes in college, and then also, of course, Kyler Murray in the pros. And both of them have turned out pretty well. I know people have reservations about Kyler Murray, but it's more about his size and all of that rather than necessarily how he has progressed. So I think as far as what the Washington offense needs to do, they need to get the groundskeeper out there. have him paint the field perpendicularly to what it normally is. So that way, when Kliff runs all his horizontal stuff, a touchdown is worth 6 points. So if they go that way, that's good. The safety is worth two points for the other team. So if they go that way, it's not as, you only have to just remember to, run to the left, run to the right, whatever way it is for a touchdown. You only have to remember to do that some of the time, and you'll come out ahead. So,
as a result of Kingsbury bolting Las Vegas for Washington, the Raiders need to fulfill their offensive coordinator position. And it sounds like they did, according to Ian Rappaport. Former Bears OC, Luke Getsy, is now going to be the OC for the Raiders this year. Getsy was the quarterbacks coach in Green Bay, and then he moved to Chicago to take the offensive coordinator position. The Bears, 24th in EPA per drop back, 9th in EPA per rush attempt. Getsy will now get a chance to work again with Devontae Adams, unless he's traded. We'll see what happens there. But Getsy was not – I never really heard any glowing endorsements of – I don't follow coordinator Twitter or coordinator conversations too closely, but I never really heard anybody say, God, that Luke Getsy, he really gets it. He's really getting it done with the Bears. Justin Fields had a meh season considering what people were hoping for. It doesn't sound like that there's any sort of trade capability between the Raiders and the Bears now to get Fields over to Las Vegas. The Raiders have the 13th pick in the draft, but as a guy who watched fairly closely in Green Bay with Luke Getsy as the quarterback's coach, Aaron Rodgers was the quarterback at the time there. And I know he had a lot of positive stuff to say about him, but we also know that Aaron Rodgers isn't exactly the best guy to be running Indeed.com or LinkedIn or anything like that. I don't know if the guys he endorses are necessarily great hires. Getsy with the Raiders here, Dan, any actionable advice now that he's taking over? I guess it's hard to make a claim on where we stand on this until we know who the quarterback's going to be.
Yeah, I really think a lot of it's going to come down to the quarterback. And I think also, because we have a defensive-minded head coach here, he's going to want to use he's going to want to run the ball a little bit more. That's kind of where I default to if I don't really know that much about a coordinator. And he has taken a coordinator who did very well with a run in Chicago. So again, that kind of telegraphs to me that that's what he wants to do. He wants to run the ball more. The passing game, hopefully he feels like Getsy could bring that along if he has a right quarterback. But they might be looking at a caretaker quarterback situation here.
Specifically about the Raiders offense, the running game. Josh Jacobs is a free agent. Zamir White was the guy who sort of took over at the end of the season when Jacobs was hurt. How have you been handling guys like Jacobs and Zamir White in your drafts right now, Dan? Do you just assume that the Raiders are going to bring in fresh blood and he's going to trump Zamir White as, at the very minimum, making Zamir White a 1B rather than a 2? In drafts, what do you do with the Raiders running backs, knowing that the guy who's going to lead them in rushing may or may not be on the roster right now?
Yeah, it's a real interesting situation. I mean, in Dynasty, it's, you're kind of hoping for the blackjack split if you've got both Zamir and Josh Jacobs, because if Jacobs goes somewhere else, hey, Zamir could maybe slide into the lead role and you just got 2 running backs instead of 1.
Yep.
I don't know. I think it's unlikely that they're going to want to tag Josh Jacobs again. He's not going to be happy about it if they do. I think that it would be better served for them to just kind of reach a 2 to 3 year deal, something like that. If they can do it, they might want to use that franchise tag elsewhere. And then also, the more money they spend on running back, the less they're going to have to spend on quarterback. And they're in a position where, and same thing with draft picks, they're in a position where they need to free up resources for quarterback. And an easy one to do it is at running back, where you could let Jacobs go ahead and go, since he's probably got productive years left. But we know what second contracts are like, and usually somewhere in there, there's a whole lot of regret that goes along with it from the team side, and you end up cutting a guy, dead money, all that kind of stuff. And they don't really need to do any of that. Zamir White showed in 4 games he can handle a pretty decent workload. He got quite a few targets. He was getting the rushing attempts. I don't think he's Josh Jacobs, but I don't think he's a whole ton worse than Josh Jacobs either. And they can still go out, get a couple 4th, 5th, 6th round running backs to help them out. Maybe sign a Gus Edwards or somebody like that for really cheap. So there are ways they can address a running back room for a lot cheaper and free up resources for quarterback. And that, if they're smart, that's what they're going to do.
Given the landscape of rookie running backs this year, excuse me, where we don't have a Bijan Robinson, we don't have a Jamaar Gibbs this year, Dan, if you are looking to acquire a running back, would you give up a mid-second round rookie pick for Zamir White right now?
Right now, that would be a little bit tough. I mean, honestly, well, he's probably got as good a chance of hitting as any of your second round picks. So maybe I should back off on that just a little bit. That might work out okay for you. But it would be nice to have a little bit more information, or I'd be trying to push the value of that pick down a little bit, late second or something like that. I'd feel a little more comfortable with.
But shout out to everybody who's watching tonight, by the way. We got David Burns hanging out in Cedar Hill, Texas, watching us on Facebook. Thank you, David. And then, of course, Dom Gazzetti, Al Paul, 2 of the OGs here on the HSFF show. Al brings up, as long as we're talking Raiders here, he thinks there's going to be a second-year breakout in Las Vegas in the form of tight end Michael Mayer. This is a player that I drafted in a couple of dynasty leagues. I don't have him a ton of Michael Mayer, but I was encouraged what I saw as the season went on. And I think one of the things to keep in mind about Mayer, and I've fallen into this trap, Dan, Dalton Kincaid was so good last year. Sam Laporta was so good. When Musgrave was hurt, Tucker Kraft looked great. When Musgrave wasn't hurt, he looked really good. And I think that given what we have seen from rookie tight ends, the larger sample size over the last 10, 15, 20 years has said rookie tight ends rarely break out, right? So I don't want to penalize Michael Mayer from because of what I saw from guys like Laporta and Kincaid. I think there's tools here. I think he's going to be good. And I'm kind of with Al Paul here. I think we could see a second-year breakout from Michael Mayer. How do you see him in 2024?
Balky, have you been reading my unpublished report on the Raiders?
No,
because
I have not.
I swear,
unpublished, I haven't seen it, no.
I swear, you just nailed exactly everything I said about Michael Mayer. I think it is tough on his, dynasty managers because of the fact, you're watching all these other tight ends break out and you go, why not me? Why not me? It should have been me. And, sooner or later, I do think it's going to come. I think he was a good prospect. I haven't seen anything, to say, oh, yeah, he kind of looks like a bust. He just didn't get used that much until, again, the end of the year. And, so I think the breakout is coming with tight ends. It might not be a total breakout this year. Hopefully it is. You might be waiting one more year yet, but I would definitely encourage anybody in Dynasty to, put out some feelers to the Mayer manager and see what he's looking for to take him off your hands.
Let me ask you this. This is going to be a fun question. And I don't have any Kyle Pitts stuff on the rundown, so I'll weave Kyle Pitts in now. Who has more dynasty value after the 2024 season? Is it Michael Mayer or is it Kyle Pitts, in your opinion, Dan?
That's a tough one. Right. Pitts is getting away from, the whole Arthur Smith thing. So I think it will probably be Pitts, because if he has used a receiver and used in the right ways, he can, he's got a much higher ceiling. I look at Myers being more of a, I hesitate to call him a floor guy, but more of a Pat Freiermuth, somebody who's a steady Eddie, who's going to get you, some good tight end points. Hopefully as his career kind of blossoms, he's finishing in the, tight end 6 to 15 range, something like that. But I don't really see him as being a top 6 tight end very much, maybe get 1 year in there. Whereas Pitts has that potential as a pass catcher, but how he's been used by Arthur Smith is just, obviously ridiculous. So I'm looking forward to seeing if another offensive coordinator gets in there. And if we see all of a sudden Pitts being used the same way, then we go, okay, now we know the problem is Pitts. But if the other offensive coordinator, the new guy, who I forget who it is, wants to, feature Pitts, then it should be good for Pitts.
All right, so this is another thing just regarding Pitts. So I was listening to former co-hosts of this show, Jordan McNamara and Chad Parsons, they do a lot of work with football guys, and obviously the Dynasty Think Tank podcast. Zach Robinson, by the way, is the new OC in Atlanta, former Los Angeles Rams guy.
Yep.
They brought up Raheem Morris in his introductory press conference, and they said, "What do you like best about this team?" It was something to the effect of like, who's good on this team? Who really excites you? And he said, "That's easy. Drake London, Bijan Robinson." Did not mention Kyle Pitts. Am I reading too much into this? The fact that he didn't mention Kyle Pitts at all, or is there something? Is there meat on that bone here?
I mean, there might be some meat on that bone. It's hard to say. Sometimes the view that the fantasy community have of players is really very different than the actual NFL coaches that are working with them. And, sometimes we want things to be the way that we want them to be because we've expected it to be that way for so long. And we just have trouble letting go of those expectations. For me, Pitts is a guy who I've kind of let go of the expectations of. And I'm just interested to see where he ends up, what happens, so forth like that. I don't want to be completely shut out from Pitts, but I'm not going to be targeting him right now until I start hearing things from the coaching staff, a steady, positive drumbeat. Then maybe.
Let's talk about and stay in the same division here. I want to talk about the Saints. Now, Klint Kubiak is the passing game specialist currently for the San Francisco 49ers. It sounds like it's a formality, and I know it was a formality for Kliff Kingsbury to be the OC in Las Vegas, so you never know. But this one does sound like another formality. It sounds like he's going to be the new offensive coordinator for the New Orleans Saints. Now, I'm asking you this because I know you're a Vikings guy, and you will have firsthand knowledge of what it was like when Kubiak was the offensive coordinator for the Vikings 2 years ago with Mike Zimmer as the head coach in Minnesota. Vikings that year 14th in points per game, 17th in EPA per play. They had Cousins. They had Jefferson. The Vikings ranked in the lower half of the league in early down pass rate and pass rate over expected. But I don't know if we can throw Kubiak totally under the bus because Mike Zimmer loved to run the ball because he's a defensive guy. Like run the ball, play defense. Now, Kubiak was actually interviewed for the Bears offensive coordinator earlier this offseason, and apparently the Commanders were interested in him for the same position as well. But it sounds like he's going to be with the Saints this year. Derek Carr, Chris Olave, Kamara, Kendra Miller, Klint Kubiak. What can you tell us about what you expect from him as the OC in New Orleans in 2024, Dan?
I know he wanted to pass the ball in Minnesota a lot more than Zimmer wanted him to pass it. So I think, I think he will be at least balanced and possibly tend a little bit more towards the pass. I think that's what his instincts have been. And obviously with a team like San Francisco, you can rely on the run, when you've got leads and so forth like that. But, I think Kubiak's no dummy. He knows if they're trying to build a lead, they're going to want to pass the ball. It's only going to be when they're grinding clock that he's going to really look to run it. And can I ask you something, Balky? With Mike Zimmer possibly being the defensive coordinator in Dallas, what are the odds he pulls a Buddy Ryan and just belts the offensive coordinator for passing the ball too much?
Listen, I know Mike Zimmer gets salty with people.
Oh,
he's gotten salty with Matt LaFleur famously. What's interesting about, and like, I don't want to turn this into a Dallas thing. Do you think it's kind of interesting that the Cowboys have interviewed Ron Rivera, Mike Zimmer, and now Rex Ryan for their defensive coordinator position? Like, I feel like everybody else is trying to get young, and they're like, no, we're going to go with old hat here. And maybe that's the case. Maybe they're looking for somebody who's ready to light up the Cowboys offensive coordinator. It's not Callahan. Who am I thinking of? Scott. Who is it?
Schottenheimer.
Schottenheimer. That's what it is. Brian Schottenheimer. Thank you.
Yep.
Maybe that would listen. I'm in for the storylines of Mike Zimmer just absolutely landing one on Brian Schottenheimer. I don't think that's going to work because I think they're too congruent in their thoughts on how to win football games. But there's a non-zero chance of it for sure. But I'm glad to hear this about Kubiak, that you think that when he was in Minnesota, he was kind of hamstrung by Zimmer a little bit, and maybe we'll see a big year from Chris Olave.
Yeah. I think, the beats were pretty uniform here in Minnesota, that Kubiak was being held back by Zimmer as far as like how much he wanted to pass and so forth like that. Kubiak looked at it. Hey, I do have Kirk Cousins. I do have Justin Jefferson. These are weapons we should be using on first and second down. And, Zimmer's like, no, I want to control the clock. So,
and Kevin O'Connell was smart enough to realize, that's what sucked about, well, number one, it sucked with Kirk Cousins because I had him on so many teams this year, but it sucked that he got hurt because in a down year of quarterback play, Dan, Cousins was on pace for a massive year.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is, I think he might, Kubiak might work pretty well with Carr because Cousins, for a long time, he was just a little bit hesitant to let it rip. And over the last couple of seasons, we've seen him, letting it rip a lot more often. He's got more comfortable with it. But, I know that Kubiak can take Carr, who's a little bit hesitant to let it rip, and, maybe work with him and get him more confident and, unleashing some of those downfield throws. Of course, it's going to be about the offensive scheme and making him feel comfortable with all that. But, I think this could be a good thing for Derek Carr. I still don't expect Derek Carr to all of a sudden turn into, a star quarterback or anything like that. But I think he could be a little bit better than the game manager he's been.
I know we're up against it, but I wanted to weave one more topic here, and that's Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is, and I'm trying to find the news update here. Jim Wyatt, who's been covering the Titans since before I was born, said that Henry said we're going to see what happens when he's talking about coming back to the Titans this season. Now, he just turned 30. He said he doesn't know what the Titans' new regime is thinking. Obviously, Brian Callahan taking over as the head coach there. I don't know if they're thinking rebuild there or not. They could. And obviously, if you're rebuilding, you're probably not going to have Derrick Henry as the focal point of that. Henry said he still thinks he can be a 2,000-yard rusher. I take that with a grain of salt because I never trust what players think about what their own capabilities are. He averaged 4.2 yards per carry last year. That was a career low. The question here is, never too early tournament with the FFPC, Dan, running back 15 at the 507, right behind Jacobs and Kenneth Walker, right ahead of Alvin Kamara, Ramondre Stevenson, and, ironically, Tyjae Spears. What are you doing with Derrick Henry in your drafts? Are you fading him based on age and finding somebody else instead in the middle of the fifth round, or does he represent a buying opportunity for you?
I think he is at a pretty good spot right now. I have not taken any Henry yet, but, again, that's not necessarily on purpose. It's just I haven't completed that many drafts yet. So, there's a ways to go. I expect to have some Henry at those prices because, the thing is they're not going to be franchise tagging him or anything like that in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So, he's going to be able to explore free agency. If he signs with Tennessee before free agency starts, that would be a real shock to me. I think he owes it to himself to go out there, see what he can find, and of course, all of fantasy football is salivating over, what if he gets on the Ravens? What if he gets on the Chargers? What if he gets on the Cowboys?
Yeah.
So there's, we're all, we're incurable optimists. We love offense. So we're like, put him on, if the NFL would just get out of the way, let fantasy football players get in there and fix these teams, and put the right players on the right teams with the right coaches, we could have a field day. It would be so much better for the league, but we're not there yet. So
I am about 48 hours away from my first live draft of the season, and I think my team name is going to be Incurable Optimists. Thank you for that, Dan. I'll give you full credit for that. Fantastic. Let's step out and take a quick break, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back with Dan Williamson from Player Profiler, we're going to find out where he stands on certain players, Rachaad White, Christian Watson, Joe Burrow, and the like. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. He's Dan Williamson. I'm Eric Balkman. Don't go anywhere. We got a ton more to get to right after this.
From the Hometown Hero series, Zach Parise.
That is a very nice card, and that's one I'm probably going to have to organize a little trade ski with you, because I would actually like that card.
You got downtown Newark in the background. Newark has never looked so good.
No, it is not.
We'll put that back up on the screen. I just want to have a penny sleeve ready, and yes, we can absolutely work out a little trade ski for that, because that belongs in a Devil fans collection right there.
I'll trade you the Braden Schneider rookie card for it.
Done. Done.
There we go. The first card for card trade on Rip and Riff history. It was that easy.
It was that easy. That's because you know why? Because neither one of us are jerks. And it's the same thing when we try and do fantasy trades. Like we don't try and screw each other. We have conversations. If there's a fit, there's a fit. If it's not, it's not. We don't try and like take the other one over the barrel. So there you go. In a penny sleeve, hometown hero Zach Parise. He was among the league's most productive goal scorers in 06-07 and followed up with a terrific regular season with an even more impressive postseason. And then they talk about what he did in the first round series against Tampa Bay that year. So that's off to the side for you.
That's true. And, if this is it for his career, he had a hell of a career.
He did.
Hopefully he comes back one more year with the Islanders, but if he doesn't, hell of a run.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on here on the Better Sports Network. 20 minutes until the top of the hour. Thanks so much for tuning in and watching, whether you're watching on the Better Network's website, socials, the FFPC socials. We certainly appreciate it. It's a treat tonight. Well, it's always a treat every time I get to talk to people like this. Dan Williamson, the overhyped sleeper from Player Profiler. I meant to ask you this at the top of the show, Dan. Overhyped sleeper. I may have asked you this before, by the way, too, so I apologize if I did. The last missing E in your Twitter handle, is that by design? Was it because something was already taken? Is there some deeper meaning to that at all?
Yeah, I just ran out of E's on my Scrabble tiles, and so
you didn't have the blank square. You got to use the blank tile. The blank tile would have worked.
That would be it. No, it was. I don't know if it's still a problem, but when I first got on Twitter, that was the limit of characters for a handle. So I couldn't quite fit it all in.
Where did the overhyped sleeper tag come from? I mean, obviously this has to do with you playing Dynasty Fantasy Football.
It's just a reminder to me to, just stay humble. It was kind of originally it was a crack on, once fantasy football really started getting going and the internet really started getting going, we started, everybody's talking about sleeper, and it was a huge word and everybody was using it and every player was a sleeper. And it's like, you keep hyping these guys up. They're not sleepers anymore. In fact, many of them are overhyped. So, and now that I've gotten into the content side, I use it to remind myself, I might be a little bit overhyped here. Not necessarily a sleeper anymore. So, just try to keep myself humble.
We've been inundated with a ton of podcasts and shows and content over the last 10 years. Do you think that overhypedness, for lack of a better term, has gotten bigger? Like, do we have to have our guards up when we see stuff like this? Because I think there's a lot of shows, maybe some of mine, where it almost becomes a bit where you love a player so much that you can't control your praise for him. You can't look at him objectively for certain people in the industry. And then it literally be like overhyped sleeper becomes almost a joke because yes, that's what we're doing. I feel like unless you're in on the joke, you really got to be on guard for not going too deep and not getting too heavy on any certain player.
Right, exactly. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we were all drafting out of magazines and, every now and then you'd get the, I'll take, name Mario Bates. Oh, he's not even in the league anymore,
That's great. That was fantastic. I think you're right, though. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I think it has the explosion of information and takes and content in this industry is just been unbelievable. And that's why I always like to do shows with people who've been doing it for a while. And quite frankly, players like yourself that are putting your own money on the line. If you are heavy on a guy and it doesn't work out, like that really hits your bank account. If some other people, just Twitter people or whatever that don't have a site that they don't work for or whatever, and they're playing in free leagues or low entry leagues, like if they're wrong on a guy, it doesn't really make a difference, to them. But for players like you, it does make a difference. And that's why I think it's so compelling to do this segment on this show every single week called Where Do You Stand On? So I'm going to ask Dan where he stands on certain players or certain groups of players, and that's how I'm going to lead it off tonight. Dan, where do you stand? We thought we were rid of him. when the Falcons fired him. No, we're not rid of him. He's back, and he's back with a vengeance. He takes over the Steelers offense. This could be the most Arthur Smith like fantasy football pairing ever. He gets Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth. Where do you stand on the Steelers offense with Arthur Smith as the offensive coordinator? I'll let you take this whatever direction you want, whether you really like certain players or dislike certain players, now that we know who's calling the shots there.
Yeah, and still no quarterback either. I mean, you almost wonder if they hired, because I don't know what Pittsburgh's going to do at quarterback. I'm not sure if they know exactly what they're going to do. I mean, I'm sure they have a better idea than I do, but they're kind of at a place where it would be tough to, go up and get a sure starter in the draft without putting a lot of future draft picks in harm's way and giving them to other teams. So I think they're more likely to go the free agent route. Whatever happens, we know we've got Arthur Smith, who is going to fit in with the Mike Tomlin philosophy of, it's almost Mike Zimmer-ish, but not quite to that extent. But they're going to run the ball. This is what we know they're going to do. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, I kind of see them being pretty much the same as they were last year, because we saw that split backfield in Atlanta all 3 years. Arthur Smith never really picked a favorite. Now, when he was at Tennessee, of course, he had Derrick Henry. When you've got a guy like that, that really is a no duh, And also, he was only the offensive coordinator, not the head coach. I mean, he might have wanted to use, the second running back more often, and the head coach may have said, "No, we're using Derrick Henry." But so for the running game, I think it's business as usual for Najee and Jalen Warren.
And just real quick to interrupt, you're not paying anything for these guys. This is running back 29 and running back 31. They're not going until the 8th, 9th turn. So whatever at that point, right?
Right.
What about that? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, and that makes sense, because when we're talking best ball, we're looking for spike weeks, and the problem is these guys they steal the spikes off of each other. They're very good floor players, but they just don't really have that many ceiling weeks. And that's what we really need to win in best ball, is to make sure we've got a good amount of ceiling weeks coming in. I mean, floor does matter. It's important. They do fit into some builds. There's sometimes where you're like, man, my running backs are really boom and bust. And then you see a Najee Harris or a Jalen Warren. You're like, yeah, I could use one of these guys to stabilize my running back room. But, that's a best ball specific thing. Right. I think if we get to the managed leagues, then all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more attractive to have that nice floor there.
Correct me if I'm wrong, as we get into the passing game here. I thought I saw you talking on X about, look, whatever we saw from Deontay Johnson in 2023, it's got to be better in 2024.
I did say that. That was before Arthur Smith came along.
That's true. That's a good point.
I have serious questions whether Deontay Johnson is going to be there this year. He has a contract that's pretty cuttable. He's got, I believe it's $18 million and for his contract, and they could save like $10 million if they cut him. He's still got $8 million in dead cap, but so they could either cut him or they could package him up with something else to try to pick up a quarterback. Because, a lot of these teams that might have an extra quarterback, a Sam Howell or somebody like that floating around, also have a lot of salary cap space and are also going to be looking for weapons for their brand new quarterback that they're just acquiring. So Deontay Johnson going over in a trade and then, something else coming back could definitely make some sense. He's been a little bit of a malcontent, as has, George Pickens. Yeah. But, Pickens is there for the long haul. Deontay Johnson is out next year if he's not out this year. So I think that they will probably look to move him, or if they can't move him, they're probably going to. But that's still not good news for George Pickens, because you know what? In Arthur Smith's 5 years of running an offense, whether offensive coordinator or head coach, he's never had a receiver with over 106 targets in his offense. 117. Pickens was at 106 last year. And, we're talking about a guy who's had Kyle Pitts. We're talking about a guy who's had Drake London, A.J. Brown. these names may ring a bell with you, and are pretty good players. And he still couldn't find that many targets for him. And so I don't think he's going to find that many targets for Pickens either. I think Pickens will probably melt down midseason if he's,
I could totally see that, and the thing is, so like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Dan. Arthur Smith, Steelers, running backs, status quo, receivers, you're out on Pat Freiermuth, kind of in the middle of those.
Yeah, Freiermuth, I mean,
because he's cheap.
I think where he's going is fair. Yeah, he's cheaper than he was last year. So I think where he's going is fair. I think he can bounce back a little bit from when, last year was just a debacle for him. I think he'll do better than that in the Arthur Smith offense. Who knows? Maybe he'll find a way to work Darnell Washington in and, give him 60 targets or something like that. But I think there's only so many goal line flips, and that's about all you can use Darnell Washington for, other than the occasional trick play. So I think the passing game there is just not going to be worth getting, investing a lot into.
Freiermuth tight end 18 at the 1102 right now, which is fine. Like I have no problem with that. Not necessarily targeting him there, but I have no problem with it. Kenny Pickett was he drafted 3 years ago now, or was it 2 years, Dan?
2 years. So this would be his third year. Yeah.
Okay.
Third year coming up.
The Steelers have the 20th pick in the draft. You already talked about Deontay Johnson being a potential trade chip. What are the chances that the Steelers could go up and grab one of these super talented? I mean, there's a lot of good quarterbacks going in the first round of the draft this year. What are the chances? Like, I know they just drafted Pickett. Could you see them moving up and grabbing their future franchise quarterback over Pickett now?
I think it would be too costly for them to move up for one of the top three. And then you're looking at Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Michigan kid, JJ
McCarthy.
Yeah, McCarthy. And I don't think any of them is a slam dunk to be a capable starter this year. They may need a year to redshirt, or if they do start, it could be tough. And I think Mike Tomlin would really rather find, he might be willing to get one of those guys, but if he does, he's going to want to grab somebody else who can maybe help pull them along. Give them a few games off if they need it, just to push them somehow.
Right. By the way, shout out to Takeda, and I apologize if I'm butchering your name, Takeda Copa, who is watching live from Mombasa, Kenya, which is fun story, maybe not so fun of a story. When I was a freshman at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, my roommate, Dan, was supposed to be David, what was his last name? Omandi, I think. And he couldn't get in because that's like right when the embassy got bombed, or like there was a massive thing in Kenya. So I had my freshman year, like my first semester, had my room to myself because my roommate couldn't get there. So shout out to Takeda Copa, who is watching us from there. I know it's kind of a weird story to bring up, but every time I see Kenya, that's always what I think about. Every time I see the words Rachaad White, I think polarization. As polarizing as this guy was last year, he's even more on opposite ends of the spectrum, and seemingly this year, Dan. You look at the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, Rachaad White is going as running back 10. He's gone as early as the 301. He has gone as late as the 409. So you're talking about almost 2 full rounds of difference near the top of the draft. I think the thing that's interesting here is we kind of always thought there was going to be a running back that would supplement him in Tampa last year, whether that be the kid out of Vanderbilt, whose name is escaping me, Keyshawn Vaughn, who never really materialized. Then there was the Chase Edmonds thing, and that never really happened. They could have brought back Leonard Fournette. That didn't happen. So I'm kind of thinking like, well, if they didn't do it last year, would they really do it this year where they would bring in a serious competitor via free agency or maybe a day 2 pick in the draft, given how deep the running back class is this year? Or is Rachaad White worth his ADP right now, which is currently at the 310?
Yeah, I think, the lazy analysis to say, well, it's a dangerous pick, because they need to add, and you went through all that. But I think the sharp way to look at it is, why are they adding? What are they adding? They've got $43.5 million in cap space, but they've also got to hopefully sign Mike Evans and in Baker Mayfield, right? And that's going to take up a good chunk of that cap. They've got a couple of their starting defensive players that they need to sign. They're not going to have a lot of cap room left, so they're not going to be going out. I guess they could go out and try to get a Derrick Henry or something like that, but I'm not sure that's what this team really needs, and hopefully they see that. Also, Baker checks down relentlessly, and I think no matter what happens, Rachaad White's pretty much a lock to hang on to the receiving work there. And, so they're going to add to the running back room. They need more depth. The guys that they keep trying out next to Rachaad White, as you said, have not worked out. They need somebody who can work out a little bit better, because if Rachaad White gets hurt, or, just to be able to spell him a little bit more, I wouldn't mind seeing Rachaad White lose 15-20% of his carries if they're coming in the middle of the field, or just not high leverage situations. I don't think that would hurt his bottom line in fantasy very much at all, and it would keep him a lot fresher.
I think that so where, like, as far as where you stand on him at the end of the third, target, fade, or whatever for you there.
I've been targeting him at the end of the third. I'm fine with taking him there. He's one of several players I have my eye on at that spot.
And I could be on board. I can be on board with that for sure. I want to bounce around here a little bit, because there's certain players I want to focus in on. Christian Watson is kind of a polarizing guy too. Christian Watson is a guy that was drafted in fantasy in 2023 as the number one receiver in the Packers offense. What we have seen for the Packers offense in 2023, they didn't really have a number one. I mean, some weeks it was Jaden Reed, some weeks it was Dontavian Wicks, some weeks it was Romeo Doubs. I don't know if there was ever a week this year where it was Christian Watson, maybe one, maybe two. But Christian Watson really had his breakout at the end of the 2022 season with Aaron Rodgers. As a result, as you can imagine, Christian Watson is going fairly late in drafts. He's the wide receiver 44. Dobbs, Brian Thomas, the rookie out of LSU, and Deontay Johnson going right in front of Watson. He's going right ahead of Cortland Sutton, Mike Williams, and Josh Downs. Christian Watson, wide receiver 44 at the 904. Dan, where do you stand on Watson at that value?
All right, I'm going to give you a caveat here, Balky. Anything I say about Watson, you should probably just do the opposite, because I've been dead wrong on him from the start. So when he came out, I was like, that's a terrible prospect. That was a major reach by the Packers. They should have never taken him. Then he goes on his, 9 game rampage at the end of the season, right, and, just goes absolutely nuts. And so I'm like, I'm looking at this and I'm going, yeah, this is a little bit more DK Metcalf than it is, what I was thinking it was. So I started picking up Watson shares in Dynasty. I started drafting them a lot in redraft, best balls, everything. And then all of a sudden the hammy problems start. Oh boy. So I did fortunately back off before we got to the really expensive leagues in August and September. But I had way more Watson than what I wanted last year. This year, I think, if he can get the hammy solved, then he probably could and should still be the alpha there. Jaden Reed, nice player in the slot. Romeo Doubs is a good second player. I actually like Dontavian Wicks a lot. I think if Watson just can't keep healthy, I think Dontavian Wicks is going to really benefit. But one of the main problems in Green Bay is you do have so many mouths to feed there, right? Because you got the two tight ends and you got Aaron Jones, and so even just in the passing game, there's a lot of mouths to feed. And then you add on that they want to run the ball a fair amount too. So it's a tough scene all around. So Watson, I'm definitely at that price. I'm going to be taking some shots at him, but I'm not going crazy on him.
Wicks, never too early best ball tournament, 15-11. He's a spike player for sure. I mean, he had so many touchdowns last year. I think he had a couple of 100-yard games as well. Is that a guy that once it gets to those late double-digit rounds, you're like, okay, I got to get Wicks on this team? You know what I mean? Like, how are you feeling about him in best ball formats?
Yeah, I'm definitely liking him in best ball because of the fact that you can pick him up late enough that you don't need him every week. Right. But he does have those spike weeks coming in on a fairly regular basis. At least he did last year, and I think it'll be the same thing this year. So yeah, it works out good. One of my good friends and a guy in the hard way Noah Rudell was the one who put me onto Dontavian Wicks early last year. So I was kind of sneaking him on some dynasty rosters throughout the course of the year as I had room, once buys got by, and, I could kind of sneak another extra player on without having to worry about bye weeks. He was a guy I snuck on there a lot. So I've got a decent amount of them in dynasty, and I like the feel of that.
What's interesting about Wicks, and like I host a local radio show in Northeast Wisconsin, and we do a 7-round mock, not a 7-round mock draft, but we pick basically what players the Packers are going to pick with all their picks. And normally we whiff on all of them. I got 2 of them right last year. I got Sean Clifford right, which who knew, but I just had a feeling that the Packers had him in. They liked him. I got that one right. The other one I got right was Wicks. And what's interesting about Wicks is he fits all the physical benchmarks that you have to hit if you want to be drafted by the Packers. And he had a great 2021 season. His 2022 season at Virginia, new head coach, new OC, like it was a totally new offense, and he just didn't adapt to it. He was okay, but it was a big letdown. If he would have come out after that 2021 season, he might have been a 2nd or 3rd round pick. And I don't think that's hyperbolic when I say that. I think he could have been a 2nd or 3rd round pick. As it stands, he slips to day 3. The Packers are very happy about that going forward. Wicks is interesting. And for what it's worth about Watson's hammy problems, the Packers did fire their strength and conditioning coordinator. So maybe there's something there. Watson said, and I don't know if this hit the national landscape, it may have, he said he spent tens of thousands of dollars of his own money trying to figure out why he has all these soft tissue injuries. So he's obviously dedicated financially and physically to try to figure this out. I think he's an interesting buy here too. The next 2 players I want to talk about, Dan, and it's probably going to be the last 2 players we can talk about in this segment. They're teammates right now, but they may not be teammates in 2024. That's Joe Burrow, and that's T. Higgins. Now, as we look at the ADP for these guys in the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, T. Higgins is wide receiver 26. He's going at the end of the 4th round. Joe Burrow, quarterback 7. Single quarterback start, obviously, this, but for the viewers so they know. Single quarterback start league. Quarterback 7 for Joe Burrow. He's going in the mid-7th round. Can you tell us where you stand on these players and their current ADPs in this tournament?
Yeah, I think, Burrow is quite a bit cheaper after the injuries, and probably a little bit deservedly so. But still, quarterback 7, you're counting on him. It's just that he's not up in that top tier of quarterbacks like he was before. He's kind of slipped down into that 2nd tier, which I think is probably where he belonged all along, just because he's not a huge runner. He does run some, but he's not going to be the hugest of runners. Mm-hmm. Then T. Higgins, this is a much better place for T. Higgins to be going. I was completely out on T. Higgins last year. Just was going way too high. I'm like, this is the wide receiver 2 on his own team. What are we doing here? And I think a big part of why he got pushed up, and we were talking about this last night on Stack Hunters, was that, he matched up against KC in week 17, Bengals and Chiefs. And so if you got that Kelsey Mahomes stack, then you could add Higgins to it pretty easily, which put him, kind of right at the very end of the 2nd round or the beginning of the 3rd round. But, he wasn't going to go much past that because everybody was always looking to try to get that correlated stack going. So that I think is why in best balls he ended up there. And then I think it was just kind of, as regular tournaments got going, everybody, in just regular leagues, everybody was just like, yeah, that's where he belongs. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they were really thinking about it that much. So I like where he's at right now because, this is a place, wide receiver 27. That's a place where you can say, okay, a 2nd wide receiver on the Bengals, yeah, he can fit here. And I do think he's going to be on the Bengals because they can tag him. They've got plenty of cap room. Joe Burrow's got 1 more cheap year this year left on his contract. So it makes all the sense in the world for them to at least tag T, try to work out a long-term deal. It'd be much better if they can work out a long-term deal because then they can work his money with Burrow's and kind of sync everything up how they like. But even if all they can do is just get a franchise tag year, that would work too. So I don't think they have any interest in letting him go. I think T would probably like to stay there. I think he likes where he's at. I'm sure could be interested in being an alpha somewhere else, but he's not going to be the one who decides that. It's going to be the Bengals who decide it.
That's what I wanted to touch on here briefly. Where Higgins is going, you just said, end of the 4th round, that is a perfect spot for this number 2 receiver in Cincinnati. Let me play devil's advocate here. Let's just say he's not the number 2 in Cincinnati. Let's say he hits free agency, somebody gives him a boatload of cash, he moves on. Even if that happens, Dan, it's going to be for a lot of money, and a lot of money means we are going to use this guy in our offense and probably as our number 1 receiver. So even if he's not back in Cincinnati, I got to believe that whoever is paying him is going to throw to him a ton. I'm not seeing the downside here. Even if he's not a Bengal next year, you're still getting a great deal on him, even if he's somewhere else at the end of the 4th round.
Right, exactly. You're basically buying at floor price here.
Yes.
Where injuries notwithstanding, but of course you can say that about every player.
Correct.
So you get the floor price. The only thing is, that he would bounce up higher, except for I think everybody's kind of looking at it that there's like maybe a 10% chance he ends up somewhere else. So you can't really put a whole lot of weight behind that of, well, he could be, the lead wide receiver for Houston or something like that. Mm-hmm. He could be, but very likely not.
I still think the Kansas City angle is interesting. I don't know how if it fits in with what they're doing with the salaries there next year. But man, Mahomes, Kelsey, Higgins, and Rashee Rice. Oh, mother of God! You think the Chiefs already had a dynasty? This could be a huge dynasty if that happens. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Here's what I want to do. I want to take a quick break. When we come back, Dan, I want to talk with you specifically about some of the picks you've made in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. I want to get into your strategy. I want to talk about Malik Neighbors. I want to talk about Brock Purdy. No, let's not talk about Brock Purdy next segment. Let's save that for the final segment. But I do want to talk about your favorite player of all time, Tyler Lockett. We're obviously going to get into that as well. He's Dan Williamson from Player Profiler. Follow him on the X at Overhyped Sleeper, the last Ian Sleeper missing. And, of course, Eric Balkman here from the FFPC. Take a quick break. When we come back, it's hour number 2 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, but they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. There's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing, too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game.
Yeah.
That they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky,
no way,
is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
9 minutes past the top of the hour here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, myffpc.com. Of course, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the road of his High Stakes Lowdown. And welcoming in tonight, guy, man, we've had so much fun tonight. We got some more fun ahead of us. Dan Williamson, content creator for Player Profiler at Overhyped Sleeper on the X. Take out the last E of Sleeper. I think that now is a good time to bring up, and we'll get into Dynasty coming up. We're going to get to the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. We'll get to Dynasty stuff in the second half of this hour. If you're looking for Dynasty action, I always say if you want to play fantasy football 365 days a year, myffpc.com, myffpc.com is where to go to pick up Dynasty Orphan teams. Numerous squads have already had their 2024 entry fees lowered, so check that out at myffpc.com. Mr. Bakes-A-Lot hanging out on YouTube watching us tonight. Dan, how many Dynasty leagues, do you even know how many Dynasty leagues you're in? Like, could you ballpark it?
I am in, I believe, about 13, maybe 14, something like that. Yeah, just enough where I kind of lose track of exactly how many, but
right.
I can still sort of manage them all pretty well.
I will get into Dynasty in a little bit, but I do want to ask about this Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. You were in the very first Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament draft that was held with the FFPC this year. You have played in this before. You have drafted in this before. You are no stranger to it. When you consider that you are drafting in January and February, and then this is the other thing, this is the misnomer about it. This contest locks in late April, so people cannot draft in this in July and August. Like we're all sorting through the same. We all have access to the same information here. Drafting this tournament, how does your strategy change as opposed to like a standard best ball tournament?
Yeah, so for this one, I mean, it's basically like you said. It's about trying to guess what's going to happen. You know, you're trying to figure out the league before the information comes out. You know, who's going to be a free agent, who's getting cut, who's getting a new contract, which draft picks are going to be important, you know, and you can't really say who's going to go where. You know, we know it's really tough to kind of figure out the NFL draft, but at least know which rookies are good and, you know, which ones the other players in the best ball tournaments are kind of ignoring because, you know, they're not the hot rookies that everybody's talking about in Dynasty. Because almost every year at this time of year, I can pick up, you know, like a few years ago when Miles Sanders came out, I was picking him up in like the 19th, 20th round of these best balls. You know, there wasn't a tourney back then, but, you know, I was still picking him up in the 19th, 20th round of these best balls. And, you know, it was just like found money because all of a sudden he gets drafted in the second round. Nobody was really expecting it. Nobody had been talking about it. And, you know, I had all these teams with a super good late round running back.
I think that like, well, I mean, how much do you swing for home runs in this competition, Dan? And when does that start? Does that start after round 8? Does it start after round 10, 12? Like, how do you, because I feel like if you hit a home run early in January or February, that goes much longer than a home run in August does.
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, you know, you've got to understand that some of your teams are just not going to be good. You know, if you try to make every team, you know, where it's like, oh yeah, I've got a good floor here, I've got a decent chance. You know, you might get a few pass through, but you're going to get a lot of teams that are just knocked out before you even get to the first elimination. And when you do get to that first elimination, that's where the rest of them are probably going to go.
Right.
So you just want to pick up themes, and it's, you know, in a lot of ways, it's like any other best ball tourney. You know, you just want to have a narrative going throughout your draft that makes sense with all your draft picks, and then, you know, you balance upside and floor. You know, even if you shoot for the fences every single time, it makes it hard. But, you know, if you need a Najee Harris, who we were talking about earlier, then go ahead and take him. Don't worry about that. You know, just make sure you're taking swings throughout. So, you know, my swings could start in the first round. They could start in the 5th round. They could start in the 8th round. it just kind of depends on how the draft is falling to me.
For anyone who is not familiar with the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, there are 2 of them actually going on at myffpc.com. It runs until the NFL draft starts. It concludes on April 25th of this year. The classic tournament, the non-Superflex one, 1,440 teams, best ball slim rules. There's no kickers. There's no defenses. It's a 20-round draft, a 14-week regular season, and then single-week elimination playoffs from weeks 15 through 17 before we crown a champion in week 17. You can draft at your leisure. If you want to draft in a 30-second sit and go draft, you can do that. 60-second live drafts, you can do that. A 2-hour slow draft, a 6-hour slow draft, you can do that as well. That's at myffpc.com. $125 entry fee. You will be accessing a $25,000 grand prize, nearly $200,000 in prizes in that competition. And by the way, if you like doing Superflex, you can play Superflex as well. That one is just a $35 entry fee, more than $70,000 in prizes, and a $10,000 grand prize. Get over to myffpc.com. myffpc.com is where to go for the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament that launched in mid-January and will end in late April. Dan, let's talk about some of your picks in this draft. Now,
all right, I'm
ready. No, we're not. No, we're not doing that. Absolutely not. Here's the thing: if you're pulling the early 2000s Cleveland Browns thing on us, ain't nobody going to be drafting in this turn because you're good at it. Like you know what you're doing. And now here's the confusing part. So we're going to go through your drafts, and I want to put this out there. This is not one draft. I focused on 2 separate drafts. So Dan did not have the 412 and the 502 pick in the same draft. I just want to focus on like some of the picks that I found interesting in this draft. So the first one I want to talk about is where you had the 2nd overall pick, Dan. I think it was McCaffrey went first. You had your pick of the litter of anybody else. You went receiver, and you went with CeeDee Lamb over Tyreek Hill, over Justin Jefferson, over all these guys. Can you tell us a little bit about why CeeDee Lamb was the pick for you there?
Yeah, that's really kind of almost a safety pick, but I think it's got reasonable upside as well. Justin Jefferson, we don't know his quarterback situation. Tyreek Hill is 30 years old. Jamaar Chase is, in a lot of ways, he's a great best ball pick because his stats bounce up and down from week to week more than pretty much anybody else's. But in the first round at the 102, I would rather have somebody who's bouncing around a little bit less. So that kind of made it CeeDee Lamb by default.
CeeDee Lamb by default. Nobody's going to argue that. This is the new normal, and I'm totally on board with taking. We talk about CeeDee Lamb being the 2nd overall pick in January, February. He could very well be the 2nd overall pick in September too, as well. Talk about rookies here. If we look at the ADP, the 2nd rookie, number one, the top rookie going off the board, non-Superflex drafts, Marvin Harrison at the 310. But after that, you have to wait till the mid-5th round to see Malik Neighbors go off the board at the wide receiver 29 position. You took him, basically at ADP at the 412. Can you, because there's a lot of people watching this right now that are not totally familiar with Malik Neighbors. Can you tell us a little bit about why you like him and his impact in his rookie season?
Yeah, he's a great run after the catch guy. I like his film. I'm not a great film guy. I will leave the film study to other people, but I do watch enough just to kind of get a sense of what kind of a player is this and so forth. And I really like Neighbors' game. I think his measurables are going to fit real well with the NFL. His production has been fantastic. Everything's right there. To me, Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr., who's going to have the better career? I have a hard time saying. I know everybody has Marvin Harrison Jr. in front of Neighbors, but we know a lot of times, even if it starts that way, that's not always the way it ends up. So, Neighbors that much later than Marvin Harrison Jr., to me, that's a little bit of a steal. And at the 412, that's one of those picks of, he's definitely not coming back to me. I got to take him at 412 or 501. Right. So, whichever. So and that was one where I was like, I'm going to give him the earliest ADP I can just to make people think.
I think that's compelling. And I think, rookies in this contest every single year are compelling as well. we went from the top 2 rookies here to the top 2 Jaguars receivers, which is next on my list. If you look at the never too early ADP, going back to back at wide receiver 31 and wide receiver 32, Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. Now, we are looking at not quite a full round, but Ridley is going about 3/4 of a round ahead of Christian Kirk right now. Christian Kirk's ADP is at the 606. You took him at the 502. Now, maybe this comes into to the fact like, okay, you didn't think he was going to make it back to you, and if you wanted him, you had to take him there. But I want to ask you, just from a standpoint, just to confirm, was that the situation, or do you think the rest of the FFPC field is just too low on Christian Kirk for 2024?
Now, honestly, that's a pick I would like to have back. That was in a live draft. It was in a live draft, and I got snaked on a couple picks right before that. So I was just kind of like, oh, shoot. I figured for sure, and I think Neighbors might have been one of them. I don't know. But anyway, I was just positive that one of these guys was going to make it back to me, and all of a sudden I'm scrambling around for a backup plan, and I hit on Christian Kirk, and I'm like, well, he's all right. And, but really once I started getting into it a little bit more, and I've, done a good bit of studying between, that draft was 2-3 weeks ago or whatever, Christian Kirk is not the greatest of best ball picks, just because he's one of those, kind of a Najee Harris, Jalen Warren type. He'll give you the good floor, but he doesn't give a great ceiling. And in that particular team, I didn't think he fit as well as what I would have gotten if I'd had a little bit more time to think about it, I guess.
And that happens. This is proof positive. If it happens to Dan Williamson, it's going to happen to you. There's no shame in it. It happens to me all the time in live drafts where we have our panic picks. We just hope for the best. And sometimes they work out, and this could work out for you too.
Yep.
The entire duration, not the entire duration, the majority of the 2023 season, Dan, when I was talking about Bears running backs, well, I would ask for all the shows that I do, I would ask our whatever guest I had on, or guest co-host, what do you think? Who's the guy? Who's the guy this week? Who's the guy to own for the season? And now I'm asking you that here as we head into 2024, because we have another kind of conundrum with the Bears running backs this year. I think in FFPC players would back me up on this, that Roschon Johnson is probably the pick. However, while he is the top Bears running back going right now, he's not going until running back 36. He's not going until the middle of the 11th round. You took Khalil Herbert at the end of the 10th round. Now, on average, he's going in the early 12th. I think ADP gets a little fuzzy, and it doesn't really matter at that point. But he's running back 42, and then Deontay Foreman, 1906, running back 75. Can you enlighten us? I mean, is Herbert just simply a pick that we can say, okay, well, we'll see what happens with him here for best ball, but I don't really trust any of these Bears running backs? How do you look at that situation?
Yeah, I think if we trusted any of these Bears running backs, they'd be a lot higher up, because we expect the Bears to have a good running game, but we also expect that it's probably going to get fuzzed out a lot with, you got Roschon Johnson, you got Khalil Herbert, you got potentially Justin Fields, or if not him, Caleb Williams. We'll probably do a decent amount of rushing, not like Justin Fields. But, right now there's just so much uncertainty. And then I think Deontay Foreman is probably a goner. I mean, I think he's a good player. I think where he's going in the best ball tourney is actually a pretty good pick. But I just don't know that he'll be with the Bears this next year.
Yeah.
And I think Khalil Herbert is a better runner than Roschon Johnson. And, he's at least a decent receiver. So I think, if they want the defense to be guessing whether they're going run or pass, it's maybe a little bit more likely that Khalil Herbert is on the field than Roschon Johnson. I think Roschon's going to be on a little bit more in passing downs, and of course, Roschon gets a whole offseason here. He could really improve, but we were high on Khalil Herbert before Roschon came along for a reason. And so, if Roschon's gone, I'm going to take Khalil Herbert and just, take a shot at that backfield.
We are going to get into Jackson Smith-Njigba in the second segment, but I think talking about him may play into Tyler Lockett here. You took him at the end of the 10th round. Tyler Lockett, on average, goes at the end of the 11th round, so not a huge discrepancy. wide receiver 51. Famously on X and among your friends and competitors, you love Tyler Lockett. You have loved Tyler Lockett for many years. Take us inside that love for Lockett, because I know I don't think I love him to the degree you do, but I do own him on a lot of dynasty leagues, and I've always kind of liked him. Tell us a little bit about Lockett from a redraft perspective this year at the end of the 10th round where you took him, and how he plays into the Smith and Jigba, the Metcalf, and whoever Seattle's trotting out a quarterback, assuming Geno Smith. Tell us a little bit about Lockett's role in 2024.
Yeah, I don't even know for sure that Lockett's going to be on Seattle in 2024. I mean, they could cut him if he goes somewhere else. I guess I feel pretty confident that he can land on his feet. I mean, he's just a baller. And that's what I like about him. Everybody was when DK Metcalf came on, and he had his first, rookie year. Everybody's like, oh, that's it for Lockett. He's never going to be anything anymore. Everybody was all about DK Metcalf. They keep trying to bury my guy, and they just can't. So,
and he's for best ball. Like for best ball, he's awesome.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because he'll throw up a 40-point week or whatever. And it's like, this is great. And when you can get him in the 10th round, why not? Yeah. So yeah, he's kind of like. I'm blanking on the name of the guy. Used to play for the Steelers, was a converted quarterback, Hines Ward.
Oh, Hines Ward, yeah, sure.
Yeah, everybody got tired of picking Hines Ward. So, you could always get him in the 10th, 11th round for like the last 5 years of his career. And he was always a bomber pick at that price. So, I see Tyler Lockett kind of the same way.
Hines Ward has unhealthily affected me as a dynasty player, because I ended up having him in like 2 or 3 leagues. And I could never get a good deal for him, like a good return. And maybe it's because I had, as our friend Tupac always says, I had the endowment effect because he was on my roster. But then he kept churning out these top 20 seasons for like 3 or 4 or 5 years or whatever it was, like you just said. And I loved it. And it was fine. Like I cut him eventually because you had to. But I never found a buyer, and I just turned out great fantasy performances from it. And because of that, Dan, I feel like I am always holding the bag of all these decrepit veterans, like because of the Hines Ward effect. And I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that is how I view these things now. It's like, he's probably got one more year. Travis Kelce, I've been trying to trade this guy for 3 years, and I can't find a buyer, and it's probably because I value him too high, and he's not worth what I'm trying to trade him for right now. But again, I have Kelce on like 2 dynasty leagues, and it's been great, and I'll probably end up taking him all the way until he decides to retire and follow Taylor Swift on world tours. Like that's how I am with Travis Kelce because of Hines Ward. And that's a problem for me. Or maybe is it not? I don't know. How do you view that?
I think you need to listen to the wisdom of Tupac there.
Right. Probably. Yeah.
Did you win?
The greatest hashtag ever, and he never hashtags it. That's the problem.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah. No, you're probably right. Yeah. And like, I think the endowment effect affects all of us. We'll to some degree, maybe me to more so than other people. We'll get into Dynasty coming up in the next segment, the last segment of the show. We haven't talked a whole lot of rookies. I do want to focus on Jatavian Sanders. You took him at the 1301 in one of your never too early drafts. Now, the 2 drafts I looked at, Dan, one of them, I feel like you waited on tight end quite a bit, and you ended up hitting like a lot of tight ends in that draft. And I think this was the Sanders draft. I could be wrong on that. Was that the case? And what do you think Sanders does? Because again, we talked about this in the first hour. All these rookie tight ends that had these really good 2023 seasons, we don't want that to blind us to what could happen in 2024. Sanders in 2024, what kind of output do you think he's going to have?
I mean, I think he's a real wild card right now, which is why I kind of took him, for that exact reason, because I went with a lot of late tight ends in that draft, just because I kept finding values other places I like better than tight end. But eventually, even in the FFPC, you've got to get back to that tight end position. You do have that 1.5, people put a little bit too much weight on the 1.5 PPR for tight ends, that premium, but I don't put quite as much on it. But again, you need to have tight ends that can perform. And in best balls, it's a lot easier to use a stable of late round tight ends and kind of figure one of them will pop every week, or hopefully mostly every week. I would not do that in any kind of a tourney where I'm managing my roster and I'm, having to put a starting lineup out. It would be a little bit tougher.
Are you?
So I'm pretty high on him. I think, he's looked good at Texas. I'm a Big 12 guy. I came from Baylor. You see the stuff behind it. Yep. And, so I see a fair amount of Big 12 football, and he's been a guy who's caught my eye. And I think he'd be a fun player on like the Bengals, or, we'll whisper it here, the Chiefs.
It could. I mean, listen, that'd be a smart pick. It'd be a real smart pick.
Right.
Who did Texas play Washington in the college football playoff?
Yes, they did.
And I feel like when I was watching that game, I'm like, and he's number 0, I want to say, for Texas, Sanders.
I believe you're right. Yeah.
I'm like, my God, they're really hitting this guy quite a bit. And he doesn't like, to me, at least for me, he doesn't look the part of an NFL tight end, but son of a gun, was that guy getting open a lot? Great hand, good route running. Like, you don't need to be a behemoth to play tight end in the NFL, which we're seeing. Like, Sanders could be a difference maker right away in year one. We'll see what happens there. But I like where you're coming from on the Sanders pick. The fact that you can get this guy in a tight end in premium format, 1.5 points per catch, and you're getting him in the 13th round. I'm on board with that, especially when you needed to collect tight ends in that specific league. Final question for you in this segment. Those 2 specific drafts that I centered on, maybe you don't know which ones they were, but sort of your never too early best ball tournament experience. You already did the grocery bag. You feel like you don't like it, but I think you're being honest. I think when you look at these teams right now, you're really picking at nits. I think these were solid teams. I really do.
Yeah.
I think you got to be happy with them at this point.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with them. I mean, the live one, as you said, that was basically the first one that had gone all the way through. They had started some of the slow ones, which were, 3, 4, 5 rounds in, but there was literally no ADP after that. You couldn't even see what people had done in 1 or 2 drafts. So everybody was shooting from the hip in this thing.
Right.
And, that makes it fun in a lot of ways, but that's why it's really hard to tell how this team is going to turn out. The other team, I was pretty happy with. We'll see how it plays, but I like it pretty well.
We're getting breaking news in here now, thanks to our producer, Tyler Soto. From Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network, the Cowboys have made a decision on their defensive coordinator, and it is going to be Mike Zimmer. The 67-year-old Mike Zimmer, the 3rd winningest coach in Minnesota Vikings history, is a pretty significant hire for the Cowboys. He actually previously coached for the Cowboys from 1994 until 2006. And now, Dan, that we have brought it up on the show, we are just waiting for Mike Zimmer to punch out that offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. Or maybe Mike McCarthy, maybe both. Maybe it'll be a battle royale. We'd love to see that, too. Like, far be it for me to encourage drama in Big D with Jerry Jones running things. I love it.
Can we put some folding chairs on the sidelines, maybe?
No, but they got to be hidden. Put them under the bench.
Right.
Hide them underneath the Gatorade buckets. As long as they're hidden, yes, we do need to make that happen. We will make some dynasty advice happen in our next segment, ladies and gentlemen. Dan has written several articles for Player Profiler, the state of the union for Dynasty in the AFC East. I have several players I want to ask him about, including, but not limited to, Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Waddle, and James Cook. Plus, I'm going to pitch my trade to Dan to tell me, for him to tell me which side he stands on. That's all coming up in the last 27 minutes of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network. Dan Williamson for Player Profiler, Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. We got much more for you right after this.
Of the NHL games, I had a conversation with Coupe A Fiasco yesterday when we were producing High Stakes, and he was talking about playing video games. And I, since he covers fantasy football, I said, "Hey, are you going to be getting the new Madden this year?" And he goes, "Yeah, I don't really play Madden. I play NHL." And that tells you, and it really does, that I do feel that the NHL game is better than Madden. I feel like Madden is overrated. The NHL game is so realistic. I don't know if you guys saw the trailer and all the new additions that they added to this game, but it really looks good. I tried finding all the games that I had of NHL, and I thought I had a lot. I only have 4 of them. And that's because I used to live with my my roommate and good friend who, got me into hockey, and we would play most of it in his house. So he has most of the games, but I do got 21.
There you go.
I got
Okay.
NHL 18. We got Connor McDavid up there.
There you go.
NHL 12, I think, was the start of the new consoles for me. But the big one,
Okay.
the holy grail of NHL games, NHL 94
Oh, there
for
you
the
go.
Sega
I mean,
Genesis
there.
right there. Look at that. Look at that beautiful cover. Look at it. Looks like a VHS tape. That's how good this game was.
No, let me stop you right there. So people, VHS tape, if you don't know, it's this like rectangular black plastic with the magnetic tape on the inside. Tape's this big. You put it in something called the VCR. For a little while, there was something called Beta. It didn't last too long.
Look at this cartridge. I mean, they're not cartridges anymore. They're either discs or those little memory cards. But man, that thing is thick, right? And
You don't even
then
need a cartridge or a disc anymore. You can buy the digital version.
digital version.
Any
And
of
then you
that.
got Ron Barr on the book. I mean, he used to
Oh,
be
yeah.
always in the intro telling you about the team and what was going to be happening in the game. So NHL 94 is by far my favorite game, sports game. I love that game.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour has Fantasy Football Show, excuse me. God, I make that mistake every week. Has 24 minutes and change left here on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman at Eric Balkman on the X. Dan Williamson from Player Profiler at Overhyped Sleeper. Knock out the last E of Sleeper on the X, content creator there. By the way, as long as we're talking about all the great websites you can subscribe to out there, let me tell you a little bit about Fantasy Alarm. You can actually get an all-pro subscription from Fantasy Alarm right now. Unlock all the content for all sports, including annual draft guides, one-on-one expert access in Discord, sync up your leagues so you can analyze matchups and trends in your specific leagues, lineup generator integrated with fanjections, daily and weekly rankings, the value vault, position coaches, waiver wire, ownership percentages, projections, stats, and tools. Build better lineups guaranteed. Get access to everything Fantasy Alarm offers all year. Use promo code LOCK at fantasyalarm.com/lock, fantasyalarm.com/lock. That's LOCK. Dan Williamson, now hold on. I have to ask you this. I know this is a little bit off the beaten path here. You used to work in the restaurant industry for many years, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I was a general manager of a restaurant for close to 30 years.
Okay. You are a foodie as a result, right? You have to identify as a foodie.
Yes, I do. I mean, there are some things I'm not going to touch, but for the most part, I'm all over the map culinarily.
That's fine, because this is where I want to go with this. This is Super Bowl weekend. This is like the mother of all parties, like as far as football and food, where they mix and match together. I don't know if you host. I don't know if you prefer to host or you prefer to go somewhere else. Super Bowl parties, what must they have from a food standpoint, Dan? When you go to a Super Bowl party or when you host, what's the stuff that has to be there?
See, now I don't think of it as stuff that has to be there, because we've been doing a Super Bowl party for 35 years now, basically, as long as my wife and I have been married. We've been hosting a Super Bowl party, and this thing has turned into a feast, an extravaganza, because what we started doing was we started offering prizes for the best and most original appetizer and the best and most original desserts. And so everybody is just like fired up to try to win these prizes. You know, they're not huge prizes or anything like that, but they're fun stuff. And it brings out the competition in everyone. And so we get all kinds of stuff. We've had Reuben balls, we've had like a mango shrimp dish, and just you name it, everything's out there. Burnt ends. So from the very traditional stuff to it's just some wild things. But the spread every year is just amazing.
So if I was to pinpoint you into your favorite dish over the last 3.5 decades that you have had at a Super Bowl party, is there one or maybe two that stand out that you could tell our our viewers about tonight?
I'm a big smoked meats guy, so if there's some smoked meat involved in there, it's probably going to be a favorite of mine. Always love some good ribs, some burnt ends are good. Those are probably my top two as far as that goes. But yeah, we just get such great variety. I just like to sit back and see what comes of it.
You're a Midwest guy. I know you're a big fisherman as well. Where do you stand on smoked fish? Because I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, I like a good smoked whitefish.
Yes,
that's fantastic. Yeah, smoked lake trout also very good. So yeah, and of course a smoked salmon is really good. There's a lot of ways you can smoke salmon. I do kind of a hot smoked salmon that it's got a Dijon rosemary sauce over the top of it. It's just fantastic.
All right, we have to 20 minutes until the end of the show, and then I got to eat because this is insane. Let's talk about everything you're doing for Player Profiler right now. So the one article that I want to get into is the Dynasty State of the Union for the AFC East. Now, you have gone through the entire AFC East. Have these articles been published on Player Profiler yet?
Right now, my editor is busily choking on these articles as I send them one after the other. So the AFC East got out pretty quick because it was a pretty easy division to do early. There wasn't a lot of movement, but I was having to wait for, all the coaching hires and hopefully the offensive coordinator hires and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So, it makes it easier to do that article, and it's a little bit more, stays relevant a little bit longer if you've got that. So, so I've got two more in the can that the editor is working on. I have a third one that I'm finishing up. That'll complete the AFC, and then I'll be moving over to the NFC next week. And it's basically as fast as they can get my work cleaned up and put out there, so it looks respectable. That's all we're waiting on right now.
Well, the AFC East is out there. No paywall. You can read this for free. It's great stuff. I've read it, and I learned a lot. And I want to we won't focus on all the players that you talked about in these pieces, but I do want to give everybody a taste of what you can check out. We'll start with the Patriots, Ramondre Stevenson and Demario Douglas. Two guys that went in opposite directions in 2023. A lot of people had high hopes for Stevenson. Injuries and some other things went against him, and now he has slipped in dynasty value. Demario Douglas, relative unknown at the start of the season, actually went up. Then he got hurt. And now we'll find out what they're going to do with him. And I'm very excited because now it seems like they have a bona fide, real offensive coordinator and not Matt Patricia or anybody else trying to fake their way through it. Stevenson and Douglas, what can you tell us about these players as far as dynasty goes in New England?
Yeah, so Stevenson I kind of like because he does have a do-it-all skill set. He can catch passes. He can run the ball. Everything. I don't think Zeke Elliott is going to be there anymore. I do expect them to bring in somebody, but I think Stevenson probably will be the lead back there. I don't think they're going to put a lot of money into the running back room or a lot of, hefty draft picks or anything like that. I think they're going to work on getting their quarterback and getting their receiver room right and working it that way. So, and we know that they've got a defensive-minded head coach, so they're probably going to want to run the ball. So, I like Stevenson a lot, especially given that he was injured and people are kind of sour on him right now. That's a buying opportunity. And, basically in Dynasty, if you're not willing to buy some pieces that are uncomfortable for you, you're not going to get very many good deals. You got to be comfortable with discomfort, is I guess the way I'd put it.
Okay, so that's Stevenson. Douglas is a guy that I feel like he's good, but he's not so good that whoever owns him would just automatically turn any trade offer for him down right now.
I'd take a second for him right now because I think it gives you a little bit more liquidity to hang on to that second. You could do other things with it, because a pick is the most liquid asset you can own. And Demario Douglas, I don't see is going to be ever really a true difference maker. I think he's going to be kind of a guy that you can throw in that last wide receiver spot or maybe your flex, and depending on what they add in New England, because they have an awful lot of cap room, maybe he's not even that. Yeah. But I do think he'll be a solid player, but I would go ahead and flip him for a second if you can.
As bad as the New York Jets were last year without Aaron Rodgers, they still finished 7-10. They still had a great defense, and now they get Aaron Rodgers. Granted, he's a year older, and he's coming off an Achilles injury. I saw the news blurb before it went on the air tonight that Rodgers says he can do everything except for sprint at full speed, which I get. Breece Hall is another guy that probably would have been the 101 in redraft leagues prior to the 2023 season had he not torn his ACL. He kind of showed us what he's capable of at the end of the season. However, Dan, a lot of that production was based on Zach Wilson and the quarterbacks there just checking it down. Aaron Rodgers probably will not do that as much in 2024. Can you tell us what we need to know from a dynasty perspective on both the quarterback and the running back in New York?
Yeah, so we'll start with Breece Hall because it's helpful. Even if we don't think they're going to check down that much, it's helpful to know that your running back is capable of catching a whole ton of passes if they choose to throw it to them. Never a downside to that. And the thing is, if Aaron Rodgers is there and Aaron Rodgers is still Aaron Rodgers, they're going to be sustaining drives. And sustaining drives is that's what running backs live on. When your drives just keep going, that's how they keep getting their stats. Every other offensive player too. So you want to have those sustained drives. It's going to put them in a lot more goal line situations. I forget how many touchdowns the Jets scored last year, but it was not many. I think it was like less than 20 offensive touchdowns, something like that. I mean, it was horrendous, and with Aaron Rodgers, I think, you could double that probably easily. And Breece Hall is going to get a share of that. So I love Breece Hall. You'd be buying high on Breece Hall, and I'd still buy just because I think he's that good. I think other than Christian McCaffrey, if Christian McCaffrey is fully healthy, I think he's the number one running back, and I think Breece Hall is probably going to be the number two if he stays healthy. Aaron Rodgers, the guy's saying all the right things. He's doing all the right things. Hopefully he comes back. I don't think you can ever be sure about anything with a player of his age with an Achilles tendon, but he is a quarterback. The Achilles is a little bit less important to a quarterback than it is for a running back or anything like that. So I see Aaron Rodgers probably having a pretty good season. So I'm definitely holding on him.
Okay. All right. And I have Rodgers in a few dynasty leagues. So that's good to know because age 41, I mean, who knows? Once these quarterbacks hit 40, it's like it's kind of a crapshoot. We'll see what's going on. At least with him, he's got Garrett Wilson, he's got Breece Hall, he's got some pieces to work with on the offense, and you like to think the Jets address the offensive line in free agency and the draft. Moving forward to the Miami Dolphins, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe you listed Raheem Mostert as a buy and Jalen Waddle as a sell.
Yeah, because again, if you're not out of your comfort zone, you're probably not going to make a profit. Jalen Waddle is not a sell. If you're a downtrodden dynasty team, it's going to take you a couple of years to get back. Probably just go ahead and hang on to Jalen Waddle. But on the other hand, if Tyreek Hill stays 2 more years like he's been talking about, then, how good can Jalen Waddle be? There's going to be a cap on his ceiling. And if his ceiling remains capped, eventually his value is going to go down. Right now, people are still pretty excited about him and everything else. So he's somebody that you can move. I'm not saying sell him at any price or anything like that. You need to get a lot for Jalen Waddle if you're going to sell. But if you can get that, it's a move definitely to think about. Raheem Mostert, that's just simply a play on what we have going in the offense here. They scored half their touchdowns on the ground, and I think that's kind of the way they want to do it. Because Tua Tagovailoa is an all right quarterback, but he's not, he's not an elite quarterback. We'll say that much. Right. So it's basically running through Tyreek Hill. Raheem Mostert still has less than 700 career carries. I don't care what his age is. If you got less than 700 career carries, 31 years old. Hey, that's that. Given his role, he can handle it. They're not asking him to be full time. So I think Achane is going to take a step forward for sure. Raheem Mostert probably taking a step back, but I mean, at the prices you can get Mostert for right now, definitely worth it.
I think that's the thing to keep in mind is if you're looking to move on from Mostert, what are you really getting? Like you're probably not getting what he is. What you're probably not getting what he is worth in 2024. And with running backs, it's almost year to year in dynasty is anyway. So with Mostert, it's like, this is the Hines Ward factor for me, Dan, is like, I'm fine with keeping Mostert on my team in 2024 because of the low mileage that you already cited, because of what the Dolphins want to do on offense. And at that point, I'm fine with just running him into the ground. And if I get nothing for him after the season, that's fine. But I feel like his perceived value is much higher, or his perceived value is much lower than what he is going to do on the field. So let me just keep trotting him out there the weeks he's healthy as a flex or as a second running back, even if Achane's healthy, and I'll be more than happy to do that. I think you're spot on with that. Moving forward to Buffalo, let's talk about the quarterback and the running back there. Josh Allen is a guy that perennially for the last 3 years roughly has been the quarterback 1 or quarterback 2 in redraft leagues. What he's been able to do with his legs have been fantastic. What he has been able to do with Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Dalton Kincaid last year has been really, really good as well. I want to talk about him, what you do with him in Dynasty right now, if now's the time to sell or now's the time to buy or just hold. And then James Cook, a guy who really came on this past year after Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator for Ken Dorsey. We saw the Bills really put an emphasis on utilizing James Cook in the running and passing game. Your thoughts on Allen and Cook here in Buffalo?
Yeah, so I think Josh Allen, if you're buying high, and you just got to recognize that it's going to cost you a king's ransom to get him. But, it's worth it because he is the most consistent quarterback right now. The goal line rushes, he had 15 TDs on the ground, 15. And this wasn't even his best year for total fantasy points. He didn't have a great year through the air, but that's the thing. I mean, Josh Allen, if his receivers are going nuts, he can take advantage of that, and he can throw touchdown passes like crazy. And if not, he'll just run them out on the ground. It's all fine. There's just no downside on that. So until he gets some kind of a serious injury, I think he's the number 1 overall dynasty quarterback. It's just going to stay that way. James Cook, I'm a little bit more worried about him just because they could add, but Buffalo is not in a great place cap-wise. So, James Cook is, I think he'll be fairly safe. He's going to be involved. The problem is because Josh Allen runs in so many touchdowns, it kind of caps his upside. So you do have a little bit of a capped upside overall, but he can still have individually big games. So works really well for best ball because of those spike weeks. But he's also not the worst thing in a managed league either, because most of the weeks he's still doing just fine for you.
Late first round pick, let's say the 111. Would you give that up for James Cook in rookie drafts?
Yes,
you would. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So where does the cutoff? Like would you, if you had the 105, is that too high to give up for James Cook?
Yeah, it is. I would rather. I mean, if we're talking one quarterback here, which I kind of assumed that's what you were talking about. I'd go down. I think I'd probably want to hang on to my picks until at least the 107. Right around 108, 109, that's where I'm starting to think about maybe James Cook. By the time you get to the 110, I'm like, yeah, I'll take James Cook.
Are there any, and I know you haven't crunched the film and done everything on it yet that you want to do. Are there any rookies right now? I mean, I know we touched on Neighbors and Sanders. Are there any rookies right now that you're super excited about this year?
Mostly it's, I'm kind of following on the rookies. I'm not one of those people who is watching a ton of college football. Right. I'm not one of those people who's really good at studying film. For me, I just I absorb information and I listen to what people are saying, people who do study film and are better at it than me, because you got to know what your limitations are. And then when we come around to the combine and we start getting measurables and all that kind of stuff, and I can fold those kind of things in, and I don't need, somebody to help me out with those. I can take a look at it and I can see, what are the analytics telling me? What is the film telling me, or the film guys telling me, and then figure it out. So right now I try to not hold any opinions too strongly, just because I feel like you start anchoring to stuff when if you have a strong opinion. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver in this class. And then all of a sudden, what happens if, something crazy happens in Neighbors and Roma Dunze go before him in the NFL draft.
Yeah.
Right? And you're so anchored to it. Look what happened with Hakeem Butler a few years ago.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Andy Isabella. Guys are anchoring left and right to these guys, and then we see, the NFL clearly is not seeing this the same way that all you fantasy guys are. And, so that's when it's time to change your mind. So, I've learned to get better at just being a little bit of an open book where I can just put these things down. Everything's in pencil. And then, once we get more information, then I can start putting things in pen.
We got a couple of minutes left. I have not talked about my dynasty trade. I'm going to pitch it to you right now. Dan, just pick a side in this.
All right.
Team A is getting Geno Smith, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and a third-round rookie pick. Team B is getting Brock Purdy and Stephon Diggs. Things to consider: what's Geno Smith's status with the Seahawks, with the quarterback? Jackson Smith and Jigba, is Lockett going to be around? And then for the other side of the coin is Brock Purdy. If he has a bad showing in the Super Bowl, is he in San Francisco's plans in 2024? And then Stephon Diggs, he's getting older and his production obviously fell off quite a bit in 2023. Pick a side: Geno Smith, JSN and the third rounder, or Purdy and Stephon Diggs.
I'm going to go with the Genos. I mean, do you need these guys at quarterback? Let me ask you that.
That's a great question, and the other people have asked the same question. I'm not going to tell you which side I'm on, but I can tell you that the side that is getting Purdy and Diggs, that is giving up Geno Smith, only has Aaron Rodgers at quarterback.
Okay. And this is one quarterback?
One quarterback.
All right. I'm going to take the JSN side then. Because of the fact that it's one quarterback, I think JSN and the third over Diggs, who we have some questions about. I mean, I think he's going to bounce back. Diggs has been a very streaky player in the past, but he's kind of at that age where, sometimes when the cheese goes bad, it's bad.
Yeah.
And, so I would be a little bit nervous to take that Diggs side. I think I'd feel better about the JSN side because I do think he's going to blossom in the Seattle offense. Different offensive coordinator. Tyler Lockett may be moving on. If we found, this would be a trade that I would like to say, you know what, let's look at this in another month.
Right.
And
yeah.
But sometimes you just can't do that. So
Tyler Soto, our producer, is also on board. He's saying the same thing as you. I have not found anybody. I've found people that are talking about, I could go either way on this one. I have not heard anybody say Purdy and Diggs. I currently own Smith and Jigba in the third rounder. So I would be giving them up for Purdy and Diggs. And the other thing I keep coming back to, Dan, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Rob Vieira at all. Longtime FFPC player, plays in Dynasty, plays redraft. And he told me something a while ago, and it's always stuck with me. Always acquire ascending assets. JSN is ascending asset. Diggs is not an ascending asset. And that's kind of where I was if you were going to say Purdy Diggs, I'd be like, okay, I'm probably going to do it then. But the fact that you are reinforcing my beliefs on this, I think I'm going to stand pat, and I certainly appreciate that. We got to get out of here real quick. Super Bowl final score.
I'm going to go 23-20 Chiefs.
23-20 Chiefs. Everybody's picking the Chiefs. I thought I was going to be outside the box and pick the Chiefs here, and everybody's picking the Chiefs. Okay, I get it.
How do you pick against Mahomes?
Well, here's what it comes down to for me. Who has the better head coach? Who has the better quarterback? Resoundingly, in my opinion, it's Kansas City over San Francisco. So that's
and who has the better defense? I think it might be the Chiefs.
Yeah, that's another good point too. The Chiefs have won differently this year. It's been the running game and the defense. And listen, a win is a win is a win, and they've been doing it that way. Dan Williamson has been winning for years in the FFPC. Check out all his work at Roto Underworld, Player Profiler, all his State of the Union, Dynasty Edition, division by division, at Overhyped Sleeper on the X. Make sure you take out the last E out of Sleeper. This flew by tonight, Dan. So much fun. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll do this again sometime. Enjoy the Super Bowl, dude.
All right. Thanks, Balky. Appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun.
It definitely was. Dan Williamson from Player Profiler. Next week, Run to Daylight and the Sharp Best Ball host Todd Burrows is going to join me. Go to myffpc.com to check out all the Dynasty Orphans and the Never Too Early Best Ball tournaments. Numerous squads for Dynasty have been lowered, sometimes as little as $1. Pick those teams up right now. The Best of the Better Sports Network is up next. Thanks for watching, everybody. Enjoy the Super Bowl. Talk to you on Thursday.